Good morning and welcome to Willow's Green Permaculture. Today we're talking pawpaws. Not because it's not there, but simply because it's hidden by the rest of the vegetation. But I already have 100 trees. Nature's going to give them that process. But here's maybe one of the most important messages that you need to hear. I absolutely don't agree. The experience has shown me just the opposite. Now's the time to plant your seeds. And I'm going to give you a demonstration of how to direct sow your seeds outdoors, what's called winter sow them. You do it at the end of fall or any time during the winter if you can work the soil. And this isn't winter sowing in pots, although I'll be showing you that as well. But this is actually direct sowing in winter or at the end of fall in the soil. And why do I do it that way? The main reason is I have gotten over the last 3 years a 100% germination rate. I'm going to share with you how I do that, and it's going to save you so much trouble, because if you look up how to sow pawpaw seeds, you're going to read about sticking it in the freezer and then sticking it in the fridge and taking it out of the fridge and putting it in little baggies and paper and then watering it and making sure it doesn't rot or go moldy or go dry, and then transplanting it out of the fridge and into a little pot indoors, and then at some point transplanting it outdoors and then protecting it from the winter cold. And there's plenty of other complicated things that you'll read about. Whereas really there's only one thing you need to do. It's take a seed and put it in the soil. And so if this is something that interests you, then let's get started. These are from about 45 fruit that I got several weeks ago, and sometime in, I guess it was mid-October. Ate them all. They were delicious. I collected all the seed. As you saw, I didn't wash these seeds. I don't wash the seeds, and in fact, I even go as far as keeping the skin and so on. I've got all the skin, all the leftover flesh that I didn't eat. It's all in here, because I'm going to be spreading that over the ground when I plant these. And why do I do that? If you research this, most of what you're going to see is you've got to wash the seeds completely until there's nothing left on them, but not let them dry. And then you're going to have to stick them in the freezer until you're ready to use them. And then when you're ready to use them, you have to stick them in the fridge, putting them in some kind of a bag, maybe a moist paper, letting them sprout in that fridge, maybe putting them in a little bit of soilless mixture. And then you'll take them out of the fridge at some point, pot them up, and then at some point transplanting them outside and so on. I don't do any of that. And the main reason why people tell you have to wash them is because they say that all this stuff around the seed is going to prevent the seed from germinating. I absolutely don't agree, because my experience has shown me just the opposite. Now the reason why that is taught is because there's a belief that about the only thing that ate these fruit were the megafauna, you know, the giant ground sloths and so on, and so they ate the fruit whole, and it went through their intestines, and of course their intestines completely washed these seeds.
A little interruption for 2 words of vocabulary: stratifying and scarifying. Stratify means to put a seed through a freeze and thaw cycle, which essentially imitates the winter time, but to do it artificially. Scarify is to scratch the covering of a seed, the shell of a seed, or to break it open slightly in order to help it germinate. And it is believed that only the intestines of the megafauna were able to scarify the seeds. And of course, it's only the cold that can stratify seeds.
And so that's why they say you need to wash them. And also they say if you don't wash them, then they might rot on you and they might not germinate. But the reason why they would rot from not washing them is if you put them in a soilless mixture in your fridge or inside your house, then there's no life in that mixture to be able to digest or absorb all of this material. And so that's why they're going to rot. That's why they're not going to germinate. Here I'm going to be putting it directly in the soil, and that entire process of, let's say, digesting it or of stratifying it, cold stratifying it, is going to be taken care of by nature. Instead of putting it in the fridge or in the freezer and then in the fridge and taking it out sometimes and putting it back in and so on, trying to imitate the freeze-thaw cycle, simply by planting them outside at the end of fall, at the beginning of winter, or any time during the winter, if you can work the soil, they're going to get that process. Nature's going to give them that process of the freeze-thaw, and that's going to cold stratify your seed by nature. Now, as far as the flesh that's surrounding it, what's going to imitate, let's say, them getting digested? Well, when they're in the soil, in the natural soil, if you've got good soil full of humus and full of a biodiverse microfauna in your soil, well, all those little bugs, insects, bacteria, and so on in your soil, they will stratify these seeds for you as well. They will clean off the seeds. The cold stratification will be from the weather, and all this flesh will be digested by that soil life. So you need to attract that soil life to the seed. So they break up that seed shell for you. They won't be interested in a clean seed, and that's why it's important not to clean the seeds. I've actually tested using clean seeds, and I've watched those seeds just stay in the soil and do nothing for 2 years. Whereas all of the seeds that I've left the flesh on have all germinated. So the insects and the bugs in your soil will clean these up for you and get them ready to germinate. Loosen them up, loosen the hard shell, break through the hard shell for you, so you don't have to cut through the shell, you don't have to scratch it, you don't have to freeze and thaw it and so on. Let nature do it for you. Because the thing is, if pawpaw seeds were entirely dependent on the megafauna that used to exist 10,000 years ago here, then they'd no longer exist in the wild. In the wild, you don't have anybody putting them into freezers, putting them into fridges, cleaning the seeds and so on. No, the fruit will fall, the fruit will get eaten by bugs and so on. From my experience, I've read so many questions about people trying to germinate pawpaw seeds indoors, the cold stratification indoors, and all that process that I described to you. So many people, they lose their seedlings, their seeds don't sprout, or they have a very low germination rate. In my experience, in the last 3 years, I've planted about 100 seeds, and I have 100% germination rate. Every single pawpaw seed that I have sowed has sprouted using this method. Direct sowing, directly in the soil. Now, the one question to ask is, well, what about making sure they don't get, you plant them outside, maybe they'll get eaten by squirrels or other animals. If you look behind me, I'm going to be planting these pawpaw seeds all along here, alongside of our creek, planted at the base of a whole bunch of wild raspberry and all sorts of other little plants, small trees, small shrubs. There's a very rich and biodiverse amount of life in this area. Lots of stuff for the animals to eat. And also, because there are all these plants, then all of these other plants will help to hide these seeds. There are so many things for the animals to eat that they may not go for these pawpaw seeds first. But also, these other plants will help to hide them, help to mask them, help to hold them in the ground because of all the root systems and so on. But not only that, pawpaws require shade in their first about 3 years of life. While they're still small, they require shade in order to survive. They're easily burnt in the full sun. Here, what is going to give them shade are all these raspberry plants. These raspberry plants are about 1 meter to 1.25 meters high, 4.5 feet high, roughly. And so in the first 3 years of their life, these pawpaws are going to get shaded by the raspberries. But then after 3 years, at that point when they don't need the shade anymore, they're also going to be starting to grow taller than those raspberries, and so they're not going to be shaded anymore. They're going to get more full sun, and therefore when they start to fruit, they're going to have the full sun they need to produce that fruit, to produce the flowers, and to produce the fruit, for the fruit to ripen and so on. So all this diverse plant life and all the diverse soil life is going to help these pawpaws to grow. The biodiverse and rich soil life will help that seed to germinate, along with the cold winter weather, which will help cold stratify it. And so the soil life and the cold will help your seed germinate. And then all of this low growing shrubbery, the native perennial flowers, things like yarrow, New England aster, goldenrod, and the raspberries, they are going to help mask the seed from the wildlife so it can get a chance to germinate and grow. They will help mask the seedling and hide the seedling from the wildlife, from wildlife foraging. And they will give the seedling in its first 3 years enough shade to be able to thrive and survive and to thrive. And then after those 3 years, the pawpaw will grow taller than all of that low shrubbery and be in full sun in order to be able to put out its flowers, put out its fruit, ripen its fruit, and so on. Now, that being said, animal foraging is not a problem. I mean, when you look at the abundance nature gives you, look at all these seeds. These are the seeds from about 45 pawpaw fruits. Probably 300 or 400 seeds here. I'll find out as I'm planting. Nature is all about abundance. And so by planting extra, well, you're giving extra for the animals, just in case there is some browsing that goes along. But whether you plant extra or not, we started with 5 pawpaw plants 4 years ago. In their first 2 years, deer and other animals came along and they browsed on those little pawpaw plants, and they basically almost cut them down by half each time. And at the time I was disappointed and worried and so on. But as time goes by, I realized that these are natural activities. The deer and other animals have lived with these trees for millennia. And if this type of thing actually killed them, then there'd be no more trees and no more deer. Because then the deer would and the other animals would no longer have the food to eat. But you see, browsing is a natural thing. And when the deer browse on these little mini trees, what happens is they have to put out new buds and so on a shorter stem. And that shorter stem gets thicker and thicker while the tree doesn't get too much higher. And so the base of the tree over that time becomes much, much stronger. And it's the deer and the other little animals that contribute to that the development of that strength. And so as the tree becomes bigger, its base, it's going to have this very strong and thick trunk that if it had been protected, then maybe at some point it will be 3 or 4 meters tall with not a very thick trunk. And then when it gets laden down with fruit, well, that trunk might risk breaking. And then you'd have a mature tree that has broken. You see, it's not always good to overprotect your plants. You've got to expose them to the elements. All right, when I read about people trying to grow pawpaws, especially when they've started them indoors, they've used the fridge and the freezer and they've had them indoors, and they've got their saplings and they're not sure if they should put them outdoors for the winter in the pot or in the ground and so on. My advice is always the same: get those trees in the ground as quickly as possible, because they're meant to go through the winter. Don't worry about it. Now, if you start them from seed in the winter, then the saplings you're going to get will definitely be already adapted to the winter. And you see, if you can get your hands on a lot of seeds and you're worried about losing some pawpaws, well, you have a lot of seeds. But like I said, I've had 100% germination rate, and I've not lost a single pawpaw either to any winter, to any browsing. They're all there, they're all growing. I can't wait until I start harvesting it. So you see, when you start to observe the browsing of different native animals in your gardens or in your orchards or in your forest, and when you realize that it's natural and that it's actually helpful to the plants, then you can start working with these animals and setting it up so that they actually help you. When we first came here, there was nothing. It was just grass. No fruit, nothing growing. First thing we did was, apart from, I obviously plant our vegetable garden, was we planted native fruiting shrubs, native flowers and so on to attract the wildlife because we knew they'd help us. And in our second year, one of the first plants that we saw starting to grow because it was planted by the birds that we had attracted here were black-cap raspberries. And by the second year, our third summer, we were already harvesting those black-cap raspberries. And in this year and last year, so 2024 and also 2023, we were able to harvest enough black-cap raspberries to last us all winter, and this year as well. And we have many other examples of different fruit that animals have planted for us because we've attracted them. But it's not only that. Deer taught us something that I didn't know, for example, that you can prune your bean vines. When they get too tall and you can't reach them anymore up top, so it's no use letting them grow taller unless you want to climb up to get the rest of the beans. Well, you can prune the tops of it, and then the vine is going to grow from your leaf nodes. It's going to put out other vines. And it's the deer that taught us that, because one time they came and they browsed on all our beans in early July and removed all the leaves. They browsed off the ends of the branches and so on. They just left a few leaves near the bottoms of the branches, and we thought, oh, there go our beans. Well, soon afterwards, every single leaf node where there had been a leaf, a new vine started to grow. And it was the deer that taught us that. So we ended up getting 10 times more of a harvest from those bean plants than we would have gotten had the deer not browsed on them. And so when you realize that it's okay that wildlife takes some of your harvest, then it's great. And the thing is, if wildlife is taking all of your harvest, obviously that's not good. But that means there's an imbalance somewhere. Because normally wildlife prefers to eat their own wild food that should be available to them. If they're eating your entire harvest, it's because there's a desert. It's because it's out of desperation. They have nothing else to eat. And so if you don't have a lot of space or a lot of land to be able to plant more stuff for the wildlife, then maybe it's a question of getting involved in your community so that there's more space put aside for wildlife, for their habitat, for increasing biodiverse native plants available to the native wildlife. So here what we do is we plant all sorts of stuff that's going to be beautiful, that's going to make our ecosystem healthy, and that's also going to help the animals. And they actually, it's our observation that they actually appreciate it, and it's as if they know we're doing it. Well, because they watch us. The birds follow me around all the time when I'm in the forest, watch us, and over the years they have browsed less and less inside our regular gardens that we plant for us, and of course more and more in the wilder areas. Let's start planting our pawpaws. Now, one of the first things I'm going to be doing as I begin to plant, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take all this pawpaw flesh and I'm basically just going to spread it around along the surface of the ground of the planting area here. And what I'm hoping is some of these pawpaw skins have spores from the fungus or mushrooms that they grow symbiotically with. You see, because every single plant in the wild has fungus or mushrooms that they grow symbiotically with, some kind of mushroom, some kind of fungus that's going to help them to grow, that's going to help their roots get their nutrients and so on. Now, and these pawpaw are from the wild, and so that's what I'm hoping. That's one of the reasons why I keep this, and that's one of the reasons why it's important not to wash your seeds and not to throw all this stuff out, because it's the natural way that the pawpaws are going to propagate. The thing is, evolution has happened over millions and millions and millions of years. Knowing how it works, obviously we can we can help multiply abundance in nature. We can't improve upon nature. We can't say, well, nature does it that way. I'm going to do it this way and it's going to be better. It's just not going to work. Nature is perfection. And so here we try and imitate nature in all the ways possible. And this is one. Because not all the pawpaw were eaten whole by all the megafauna. Some fell to the ground and were eaten by smaller animals. The seeds may have been carried off by smaller animals. Or maybe the fruit was decomposed by bugs, bacteria, and other smaller microfauna. And so I'm hoping that these skins have the fungus spores necessary to help the plants develop. And I think they must, because I've always done it this way, and like I said, I've got 100% germination rate, and the plants are all growing really, really well. Got my seeds, got something to make my little holes with, and I've got my flesh. So I'm just going to throw a bit of flesh on this area. And I'm going to plant way more seeds than I need to plant. And eventually, if I've got too many trees, well, I'll experiment with transplanting them. And they don't really like to be transplanted, but we'll see how that works. The thing is, though, pawpaw naturally grow in clusters, and so it's okay that they be close together. So now I'm going to be planting them a lot closer together than maybe the clusters that they grow in. So now I'm just going to be making some holes here and dropping the seeds in the holes. I'm not marking where I'm planting them because I'm going to be planting them all along here. I've got so many seeds. I mean, I got hundreds of seeds here. Just throw the seed in the hole, push it down with my finger. The position of the seed really doesn't matter. And then you add the compost. Cover all those holes. And putting this compost basically is going to help me remember where I planted so I don't go working twice in the same area. Compost not only is going to help feed these pawpaws, but everything else around them. All right, continue. So that's it. That's all. I made the holes, threw the pawpaw seed in there, covered it in compost, and that's it. And I'm going to do that all along here. I got about 150 feet of creek front here, and I'm going to be planting all these along. They'll have a pawpaw grove, and then I'm going to be planting in the banks of the creek, and then I'm going to be planting also in some pots, which I'll show you a little later. So right now I'm in the creek, and I'm going to be planting right into the bank of the creek. Now there's, as you can see, there are a lot of trees in here, but some of them are buckthorn, some of them are alder. The buckthorn I have to eventually get rid of anyway. The alder, I've got a ton of it all over the place, so I can get rid of that too. I can use it for soil building, I can use it for firewood and so on. For the moment, it's gonna help because, like I said, the seeds need to be in the shade. So I'm going to be planting directly in the bank. Now in the past I've marked them. You know, I've marked where I've planted them, but I already have 100 trees. And because I'm planting so many, I shouldn't need to mark them. I'll see them. Now these trees, they like to grow close to a creek. They don't have to grow close to a creek, but they do like it. And so because of that, I can have confidence that these trees are going to help prevent erosion on this creek bank. because these are trees that grow automatically on the banks of creeks. You can see there's a fair amount of sunlight that gets in through here, but in the summertime it's in complete shade. But once they're three years old, that's when I can take some of this canopy away so that the pawpaws can replace the canopy. So the soil is nice and soft here. So I don't need to add any compost. It's easy to cover these seeds up. And because it's a riverbank, this is the best way to plant them, because I wouldn't want to transplant a big pot with a tree in it into a riverbank, because making that big hole, you're just, until those roots are established, you're just asking for erosion. And so by just making a tiny hole for a tiny seed, you're not going to get any erosion. And that seed, as soon as it starts to grow, is going to work against the idea of erosion. Now in this area, I've got a number of pots. Last fall at this time, I sowed a whole bunch of native perennials in here. Native perennial flowers, food forest items. And they're still in there, because now what I'm going to do is plant the pawpaws into these same pots, so that when it comes time to transplant these pawpaws, they will have their automatic shade protection integrated with them in the pot. So I could plant them anywhere. I could transplant them into full sun, or if someone wants to buy one of these from me, they will already have the first 3 years of the pawpaws life protection from the sun already integrated. And some of the plants that you can still see here that haven't gone dormant yet for the winter, there's some yarrow here, there's a primrose, some horsetail, whole bunch of stuff. There are a large number of different items in here. There's a New England aster, virgin's bower, cardinal flower, great blue lobelia. And they're in there, they're in these pots, they're dormant for the winter, but they will come back. There's goldenrod in here as well. Now I'm just gonna put one seed in each pot, and then I'm gonna add some compost to the top of that seed. So I'm just gonna take the pot. As you can see, there's lots of space on top. Basically, put a little hole in the pot with my finger, throw the seed in that hole, and then in a minute I'm gonna fill this with compost. It's nice and full right up to the top. Just gonna do that in all these pots. And you use this guy, the hole, throw it in the hole, and put the compost on the top, because with pots, you always wanna make sure you give them extra food, because they're not in direct contact with the soil. And the holes in the bottom. These perennial native perennial flowers, I did a video on this last fall, which I'll put a link to in the description. You might say, well, how are they gonna grow when they already have a plant growing in this pot? In nature, plants are always growing together in small spaces. It's time to transplant them. Well, we'll give them the space they need. Not worried about covering the leaves of the other plants that are in here. They're going dormant anyway. Now, I'm all done planting in these pots. But here's maybe one of the most important messages that you need to hear. Because when I read about people trying to grow pawpaw and they're having so much troubles, I often ask the question, because they'll say, yeah, I planted them and they didn't grow. And I ask them, well, are you sure they didn't grow? Because the thing is, they can take a while. Sometimes they can take up to 2 years to sprout, and that's happened here. I've had some pawpaws suddenly appear, for example, this year and last year, but that had been planted 2 or 3 years ago. Like I said, it's important that pawpaws have shade, so you plant them so that they have other plants growing around them. What's going to happen is you're not going to see them when they germinate anyway. You're not actually going to see them until the rest of the vegetation starts to die back. So we're talking maybe depends on what type of vegetation they're planted with. You might see some growing in mid to late July, others in mid to late August, but in some cases you may not see it until September, and not because it's not there, but simply because it's hidden by the rest of the vegetation. And that's absolutely fine. That's what the pawpaws need. They need to be hidden by the rest of the vegetation, especially in the first year. That's why, for instance, my last pawpaw video, I think it was in September, because I went around to look all around at all my 2 and 3 and 4-year-old pawpaw trees to see how they were doing. Because they were, in the case of the 2 and the 3-year-old ones, they had been all covered by vegetation, so it wasn't worth the effort trying to look for them before September. And sure enough, there they all were in September, and they were really easy to find. And so it's important to know that, because, you know, many people expect to see the things they plant, well, they expect to see them starting to grow in April, May, or June. But in the case of pawpaws, you're not going to see them in April, May, or June. You might see them in July or later, right up until now, right up until October, November. I saw one the other day that I had forgotten was growing in that spot, and then I saw it the other day. I hadn't seen it in a year. And so that's very, very important, because some people conclude that their pawpaws didn't grow, and then they'll do something else with that pot, or they'll do something else with that spot. And then they, you know, they might churn it up, they might remove the soil, I don't know, and then, you know, if there was a pawpaw there, then they might have killed it. So it's very important. A bit of patience and observation, and knowing that and also it's going to be small in the first year. It's only going to be maybe 2 inches tall, maybe 5-6 centimeters tall max. The leaves aren't going to be very big either. Maybe about an inch, maybe 2 long. You know, maybe 2 to 5 centimeters long. Not very big, and so easily hidden by the other vegetation. So remember that. So now I got these pawpaws all nice and tucked in with some compost. These pots are all full. I've got about 35 pots roughly, and so it's going to be 35 more pawpaw trees with their companions already planted with them. I hope you liked the video. Hope you found it useful. Hope you found it interesting. And if you found it interesting, you found it useful, you liked it, then please share it with your friends. That really helps us when you share our videos, when you hit the like button. And you know, I really think that these videos can be very, very useful, because they kind of dispel some myths about how difficult gardening can be. And because I like to help people realize that gardening is a lot easier and a lot less complicated than it needs to be. I might talk a lot in my videos, but really the essentials are quite simple. Not too many steps. And if you haven't done so yet, then subscribe. Support our channel just by subscribing. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.